All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Edward Bonver. I'm an engineer on Symantec's product security team. And today we have a interesting discussion on vulnerabilities. So our panel here, Vulnerability Lifecycle for Software Vendors. So basically, most of our OWASP is concerned with what happens before vulnerability is found. So keeping software secure, we have great tools for finding vulnerabilities. The question is, what happens after it's found? So not many people are clear about that, lots of arguments in the industry, etc. So to give people a bit more insight into what is involved, hence the panel. So let us get introduced to our panelists here. John, please. Oh, Kelly stole the microphone.
Actually, no.
Hi, John Stevens, Senior Director of Consulting at Cigital. I guess I'm on the panel because I work with a lot of organizations that do a lot of work in both static and dynamic scanning, tool-based and manual. And so that's certainly a soft spot in how people handle problems after they're found.
Thanks, John. My name is Katie Masouris. I'm a senior security strategist with Microsoft. I work in the Microsoft Security Response Center, and we are the group that is responsible to responding to vulnerability reports from the outside and driving the update creation process for Microsoft. My work actually includes security community outreach strategy, and that work encompasses dealing with the researcher community and hoping that we are all getting along as well as we possibly can. And also our worldwide security conference sponsorship, the Blue Hat internal conference, security conference. And I also run a program called MSVR, which is Microsoft Vulnerability Research, and that's where Microsoft security researchers look for vulnerabilities in third-party products, and we report them to the vendors privately through coordinated vulnerability disclosure.
Dan Holden, I'm the Director of DV Labs for HP Tipping Points Research. We're Tipping Points Research Security Group. We're also responsible for the Zero Day Initiative.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fitzgerald. I'm a senior vulnerability analyst at Symantec. I do work that's quite similar to what Katie does in that I coordinate vulnerabilities from the outside world and try to look to find the vulnerabilities and get them remediated as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible. I also sit at Symantec's crypto board, and I am also the captain of the emergency response team at Symantec. So if you ever have a heart attack, I'm definitely the person to talk before you go unconscious.
All right, so thank you all for being on the panel here. So to kick things off, maybe let us start with a little bit of history of vulnerability management in the industry. So what can you tell us? Maybe you can draw some parallels between today's keynote. Are we going through some evolutionary changes leading us somewhere else? So Katie, maybe get started on how you got involved in this whole mess.
Is this because I'm the oldest? Is that why you picked on me first?
No comment?
You asked about the history of vulnerability disclosure. So, the history, as I recall, the vulnerability disclosure going was there was the age where vendors didn't actually know a whole lot about security, and vulnerability disclosure, specifically full disclosure, was really the only avenue available for people who cared about security to get vendors to care about security. And that was an age over a decade ago that was really required for major vendors to pay attention. Certainly vulnerability disclosure has evolved a lot since then and kind of rapidly recently. And most recently, in terms of what Microsoft has tried to put out there, has been changing the name of what we call, responsible disclosure. We really saw that term as being a little outdated, and we wanted to change it to something more objective, descriptive of what we were doing, and to actually start the conversation off on a better foot. So we came out with coordinated vulnerability disclosure. It was not our idea. I actually heard that from Jake Koons from the Open Security Foundation, who talked to me about it after an RSA panel on disclosure that I was on earlier this year. It made perfect logical sense to me. It seemed like a good move to do. As I am also part of the U.S. national body that represents the U.S. in ISO, and ISO has been working on a standard on vulnerability disclosure. I actually got ISO to drop responsible from the responsible vulnerability disclosure draft standard in ISO for exactly those reasons, right? So if it's not an objective term, and you can't actually objectively decide who's responsible or irresponsible for that matter, then, get rid of it and use something more objective and descriptive. So that's, kind of in a nutshell, I'd say, a summary, quick summary of sort of some of the evolution in disclosure that's been going on.
I actually think Katie did a very good job. The only thing, in terms of history, I would completely agree. We went from, dumping bugs on BugTrack to, working with vendors, and, here we are a dozen years later, and things are going fairly well. I will say, given this year, it seems as though a lot of vendors are reviewing, I think, their disclosure policies, which is a good thing because we are a dozen years later. And it's probably a good thing to, for Microsoft and everyone involved to review their policies, which has, I think, been a very positive thing. With ZDI specifically, we recently changed ours to include a 6-month enforcement for vendors. So there's, which I think is a pretty decent timeline, especially considering some of the shorter ones out there. So I think just everyone looking back at how we've gotten to where we are and reviewing their policies has been a good thing of recent date.
I really think with our evolution over to coordinated disclosure that it's really just following along the same lines. At first, nobody was talking about security vulnerabilities because maybe if we ignored them, they would just go away. Then we went to full disclosure, but we were leaving customers at a potential to be harmed because too much information was being leaked before there was a fix. And then we might have actually been rushing vendors to put a fix in that wouldn't actually truly fix the issue. So once again, we're putting customers at risk. With responsible disclosure, we made great strides to work in a way to try to handshake between ourselves and the finders in order to try to reach a mutually achievable outcome. And now with coordinated disclosure, and Symantec has also signed on to it, it's really just taking that same thing and making it a little more exact and giving the finder, I would say maybe a little more autonomy to do something if a particular vendor is really just sitting on that defect, which I know is a great pain of many finders.
I guess from my perspective, this is remaining frustrating in the current times as opposed to what I hear. I think that the other panelists represent mature organizations by comparison to the average, say, bank, insurance company, things of that nature. If you look at it purely from a staffing perspective versus a line of code perspective, organizations that your money is with, that you have contracts with, have as much or more code than these vendors, but they have few or nobody working on the process of coordinating on discovery or on discovery and coordination with the people they rely on as dependencies for the code that they deploy underneath their code. Definitely something, if you run a security group to look at, do you have one person on this or zero? And we just heard at least 2 roles, so either of those answers is probably too few. I don't think much has changed, unfortunately. And I think that that's going to be a pretty prescient gap as we start to see a big ramp up in custom malware for these very same software products.
All right, thank you. So now let's talk about some of the choices that people or companies can make. So in regards to finders, so hey, I just found this cool thing in this vendor's software. So what do? What are the choices that as a finder you face? Do you just go directly to the company and tell them, hey, here's all the information? Do you go to proxy companies? Do you sell it in the black market? Do you just sit on it and do nothing? Maybe Dan, this would be a good starting point for you.
Well, so just going back to the history, yeah, it comes down to you can disclose it publicly on any given mailing list. You can post it on a blog, which we've certainly seen before. you can contact the vendor and work through, coordinated responsible disclosure. Then there are, of course, acquisition programs such as Zero Day Initiative and a few others out there. And then, unfortunately, there is a black market for vulnerabilities. So, I think those are pretty much the options. I think most people, especially at a conference such as this, are out to do the right thing and would like to see, the whole reason for vulnerability research is to see it patched. So I think, that's the way most researchers approach these problems. When you look at the attackers, for the most part, the attackers are standing on the shoulders of the research community, I think. And I think researchers are generally out to do the right thing. Most of them have been in the industry for quite some time, and most folks, I think, are working to actually see these things, fixed. So I think more often than not, that's generally what you see. But unfortunately, there is a bit of a black market out there, and that type of thing does happen.
Anyone else?
So I just wanted to add, those are the absolute accurate, descriptions of the choices that most researchers face in terms of disclosure. I think that one of the key things, aside from the changing of the name, that we were really trying to get out there when we talk about our move to coordinated vulnerability disclosure, is the message that even if a researcher does not share our exact disclosure philosophy, we still would like to hear from you. I mean, quite plain and simple, it's how we operated always, but it was really important for us to get that message across. And quite frankly, it's already paid off. There are researchers who ordinarily would not have contacted us. They specifically cited the fact that we rolled out that red carpet to them and said, even if you do not share our disclosure philosophy, please do, get in touch. The way I put it is, if you're about to change disclosure lanes from the slow lane to the fast lane, please use a turn signal. Thank you.
That's a good point. A lot of people in this audience, the OWASP audience, use techniques, pen testing, code review. You guys who are doing those things know that it's almost impossible to do a review and do a thorough review without finding problems in the framework-based code underneath the code for the organizations you're looking at. That could be on the Java stack. There's just 1,000 different things that people are using day in, day out. On the Microsoft stack, the ecosystem is smaller but still present. One of the biggest issues I think that this community can help address is outside of the larger mature vendors into the framework-based contributors and developers. It's something we've looked at doing with things like the ecosystem that Jeff Williams talks about. Other focus groups, Mike here has been working on browsers, but there's countless other things. I mean, if you look at Spring as an example, we were coming up with fundamental vulnerabilities in Spring in 2005. That was a long time ago. Recently, we just found another it's really a related problem that's still, again, if the application uses Spring, chances are it's going to be vulnerable. And so in situations like this, you guys are faced with this problem where you exploit the bedrock underneath these applications. My guess is that there aren't contributors to those frameworks here. The website said bring a developer. I think we need to bring the framework developers into this conversation, because if you look at, again, code count, those guys are generating as much or more code as some of the bigger and more mature platforms underneath them, but yet they're not in this discussion. I think that's the biggest thing that OWASP can do to work on this problem, is to educate those contributors as to how vulnerable their software truly is, make them aware of what the application level vulnerabilities are, bring them into this conversation, and I think it will be a range of things from shame and guilt to coordinated disclosure that's going to motivate them. But right now, they're not in the room.
Anything to add?
Thank you. So Symantec actually follows something quite similar. We're happy to talk to anybody about vulnerability disclosure. You don't need to be able to talk a specific secret language or a handshake. You don't even necessarily need to completely agree with us. We're happy to get any information we can, and we're happy to work. We don't do pay for play. We kind of consider that a slippery slope, but we're happy to work with people like Dan from Tipping Point and ZDI